Hi, guys, and welcome to the Dead by Tomorrow podcast. My name is Daniel Winter, and my co host is Andrew Monroe. In each episode, Andrew and I will explore topics that you should think about before you die. We encourage you to remember that some tomorrow will be your last, so each day could be your final chance to really live.
Hey guys, welcome back to Dead by Tomorrow. You have Daniel and I, your two most favorite people in the world. We're going to be talking about small parts, big sums today. It is a chapter out of the book that we published about 9 months ago, if my math is right, which never trust me on math. And to start this episode off, I'm going to kind of get on a little soapbox of mine. To me, this chapter is really important because I really believe in the small stuff. I actually, for a while, I've had these little paper wallets. They're these tiny, thin, easy to lose wallets that just barely pass muster on being able to hold any cards or money. And they're made out of paper and I can write on them. So one of the things that I've written on probably 4 of these wallets I've had over probably the past 5 or 6 years, because I lose them that often, is notice the small things. And it's not necessarily because I think the small stuff is more interesting. I kind of don't believe in the big stuff. Big things are only really made out of small parts. All of these small parts, the way we do small tasks, the way we treat other people, the way we treat those who we think no one's going to notice, the actions we take when we think no one knows what we're doing. These are all the small things that lead to much bigger, larger parts. And those larger parts turn into the big stuff, the great stuff, those things that we believe are what we are remembered for. What it really comes down to is the small parts, and it makes these big sums. So this chapter is really important to me because of that. This is one of my core beliefs, you could say. I'm really excited to get into this with Daniel. We'll see where this leads us and if anything's changed over the last probably 2 years since we've probably touched on this chapter. So Daniel, how you doing?
I'm good. I am currently a little sweatier than usual, despite being in the closet. It inevitably always happens, but I was outside putting together a fence because my dog has decided that he really hates the neighbor dog and he broke out a fence board. And so I just need to replace a whole section now. So it's very exciting.
Shout out to Jake for getting Daniel his exercise in today.
Exercise. Interesting. I guess I'm sweaty. Does that count as exercise?
Yeah, I think if you get sweaty, it counts as exercise. Now, I take that with a grain of salt before I get caught in some illogical argument. Just sitting in the sauna is not necessarily exercise. Just being outside is not it.
I was going to say, I get pretty sweaty when I'm watching NBA games or playing Xbox sometimes. There's a few things that can make me sweat.
We'll have to dig into that one of these days because I don't know. Part of me feels like if you're sweating, it means your body is working in overtime, and therefore, even if you're not doing anything, maybe it helps. But I don't know. We'll have to get a medical professional to give us some insight on this.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that sweating is not synonymous with exercise.
Fair enough. So small parts, big sums, Daniel. Let's jump into it. What do you think that means, and what does it apply to in your life?
Yeah, I think of, and I'm going to probably butcher this pronunciation. I think it's called the Gestalt mindset, which is the sums are greater than the whole, something along that. I probably should Google that right now, and then we can circle back around to it. But if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. If not, then have fun doing some Google. But the idea is a lot of times and in a lot of ways, like you're saying, the little things, and this is more talking about personality, but the little things that sort of all come together form something that is greater than what those little pieces would sort of be individually. And so I think that can apply in a lot of different ways. It can be, making little efforts throughout the day to sort of keep the house picked up, as opposed to needing to do, one gigantic spring clean once a year. If you're doing little things each day, which my wife and I have tried to have this habit of what we call resetting the house, where at the end of the day, we try to make sure dishes are done, the clutter is put away, we'll sweep some floors and do some stuff like that. And that keeps us from having these just big days where we have to clean the house all day. And I think that leads to a cleaner lifestyle where we're not having to put in as much effort because things don't get super gross. We don't have to do super crazy deep cleaning because it always stays a little bit clean. It's the idea of if you're taking care of things in a small way consistently, then stuff doesn't get big and bad and scary out of control. So that's where my mind goes.
And we talked about this a little bit in the book. It's a pretty short chapter because I'm a small guy sometimes. I like small stuff. So that's kind of where my mind goes to it as well. This idea that you take care of stuff, small parts that come up in your life, putting away the dishes. You have dinner, take care of those dishes, put them in the dishwasher, clean them, you put them away. There's leaving dishes in the sink. It's got to account for let's call it a third of divorces out there. Money's up there. And then probably after money and infidelity, you probably have leaving dishes in the sink.
Got some real hot takes coming in on this episode.
It's been a long day. I've been moving all week, and so I don't know. And take the dishes out. But legitimately, a lot of probably relationship stuff that causes problems are due to not some big, he ran off to Europe and had an orgy without me. Which would definitely be a problem in your relationship.
Without me. So you're saying it'd be okay if you took your significant other?
You know what? To each their own, Daniel. It's more of a lot of relationships probably don't end from those big bangs. Oh God, that was a terrible pun. But the small
You're about
stuff.
to get canceled.
I know. I'm sorry. I guess I'm on something today. It's the small stuff though in the relationships, and it's the small stuff at work that gets you noticed because you're consistently, you can't point to Chelsea at the office and say, she crushed this one individual project and that's why we're going to promote her. You can't point to why somebody's marriage or relationship's on the rocks because of this one big mistake. Now, these things do happen. You do an amazing job at one project, or you do an amazing job in your relationship with this anniversary getaway. Or you have these negatives, something implodes on you at the office, or you make a really bad decision with the orgy in Europe. These kind of things would, in a relationship, they're not very common. Most of the time, the stuff that affects our day-to-day life are these really small things that add up. It's the small ways you treat people, the small parts of how you take care of your job, how you take out the trash when no one asks you at the office or at your house. It's how you do all of these little small things that create this much larger impact on the people around you. It's really interesting to see how most people expect hey, I'm going to get my money down when I have $1 million. When I have $1 million in the bank, I'm going to figure out how to budget. I'm going to figure out how to take care of my life. As soon as I get past whatever this thing in my relationship, once we get the kids out of the house, I'm really going to work on my relationship now. Once I get married, that's when I'm really going to lock down on being more attentive to my, significant other. These mindsets that we have waiting for these big things to happen are what kill us in the end, because it's the small parts that we can kind of take care of, move the dial on.
And see, what I would argue is that when somebody gets promoted, or, when there is a divorce, or, something like that, externally, people always look at the big thing that happened. And usually that thing happens because of some big event. Somebody gets a promotion because they really did a great job owning some sort of big deliverable or project, or, divorce happens because there is some infidelity or whatever that might be. And so you blame the big event. The big event it's worth blaming, but I think we a lot of times ignore all of the small things that led up to the big event. And then we get focused on, okay, my marriage is fine because, I'm not sleeping around. So, we're good. I've got a rock solid marriage because of that. Or thinking about, if I could just land this one project at work, then I would get that promotion. And the focus is on the big thing because that's what you see. But then we ignore all of the small things that person did to lead up to it. And so in a marriage, it's, I'm not sleeping around, so we're good, but you're not paying attention to the fact that maybe you don't have a real conversation with your spouse ever. And there's just not a lot of communication, and things do go unsaid and undone. You maybe have this little gut feeling like something feels a little off, but it feels a little off, so I guess it's fine. And you ignore it until over time, those small things lead to a feeling of resentment or a lack of fulfillment. And then somebody does go and seek out something outside of the marriage. And then that big event happens and there is a divorce, or being trusted to take care of all the little things at work and consistently doing that. And then that gives you your foot in the door to get that big project. And then when you get it, to actually do it well and get that promotion.
That is exactly how I believe it works. It's something you said there, the resentment. with divorces. There was a really cool article I read one time. They talked about the single factor that they could trace that caused divorce. And this was wild because what they did was they took something like 30 or 50 or more newly married couples, and they sat them down in a dining room and just recorded them. And then they recorded them for a while. I think it was like a week or something or a month. I don't know. But they recorded these couples having interactions and all these different things. And then they tracked these couples for like 50 years or something. This is in You're Not As Smart As You Think You Are. I'm pretty sure one of those books. Obviously, I'm not remembering all of this perfectly, but the relevant information I do know. So what they found out was with like 95% accuracy, they could predict whether or not a couple would get divorced. And they didn't need that 15 or 20 years of recordings and tracking to find out. They said that they could figure it out within like the first day of looking in on this couple. And what it was is if somebody was disdainful and condescending to the other person, basically resentful to them about something they did, that was what caused divorce. It was a 95% accuracy rate. And we'll link to it in the show notes so y'all can look at the study yourself and look at it and follow it through. But what that says is it's not these big major things that caused 95% of these divorces. It was the little ways we treated other people and how we felt about them. It's really scary, honestly, because in my mind, we should all be, recording our first day with a significant other before you get married and be like, hey, did you see that little side-eye disdain thing? And they'll be like, yeah, we saw that. And then you go, oh, I guess we're not getting married then because we have a 95% chance of getting divorced. I'm probably sure that 5% were the people who are just unbelievably strong-willed and pig-headed about divorce. And they're like, well, it doesn't matter if she murders me. That will be the only way we're not married anymore. So Daniel, I'm looking at you. I know that's how you roll.
Definitely not. The thing is that resentment, that disdain, that dismissive mindset, whatever that sort of is, that's going to happen in nearly any close relationship. It's certainly going to happen in a marriage, no matter how good your marriage is, no matter how strong it is, no matter how beautiful you both are when you first get married, how beautiful your kids are, like whatever it is. Those moments will definitely happen. I haven't read that study, but I would be willing to bet a lot of money that when there is that sort of resentment and that disdain within, tone conversation, it's the folks that don't call it out and they don't talk about it and they don't say, hey, the way that you said that, that really hurt. Like, what's going on there? What's happening? And diving into some of those sort of root issues and just letting things go unsaid.
Oh, and dude, that is 100%. I can agree with that because I think what happens is a lot of people don't think those small parts matter. Hey, my husband or wife or my friend or, whoever it is, it could be any relationship and any situation. If you're not willing to have those conversations about the small stuff, which can be frustrating to a lot of people, like, why are you making such a big deal out of this small thing I said or this small thing I did? Like, get over yourself. I don't want to talk about it. That's the only way to get past it. And if someone's not willing to talk to you about it, that's a whole different problem. But we've got to take the first step to be like, hey, this was probably not appropriate, or I noticed this thing. We need to talk about this. We need to communicate to get past what could become a mountain down the road. Right now, you're right. It's a nothing thing, which means it's easy to fix. When it becomes that mountain, good luck.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Daniel, in the chapter that we wrote about, one of the lines we talked about was this is called personal life steroids. And part of that was in relation to the chasing optimization, which is actually probably the last episode we did in terms of a podcast. And I don't know where they fall inside the book, but they really go hand in hand together, that chasing optimization mindset and that small parts, big sums. It's kind of like a rectangle and a square, like one is the other, whatever. We won't go too deep into that analogy because then I'm going to get confused and trapezoids are going to show up.
Yeah, that's still math.
Yeah, everybody's going to be mad. So when you're chasing optimization, part of what we're talking about and doing is the small parts, big sums mindset. Doing the little stuff like you talked about taking care of the house, doing all these small things that up to big stuff. One of my favorite ones that we talked about was just getting everything done. It's not even just cleaning. It's, hey, you got that new TV, go ahead and unbox it, put it together, take out the trash, start and finish these small tasks and don't let them build up because This is something at least that a lot of people in my family, so sorry guys if I'm calling you out on this, but a lot of people in my family struggle with. They let all these little things build up and they build up and they build up. And then the next thing you know, it's been a few years. They haven't actually accomplished a lot of these basics that they said they were going to. And now their house is a wreck. Their life is kind of a wreck. They're busy, which I know we talked with Jonah on Rethoughts about how much I hate that word. You know, these people are busy and they're too busy to take care of all these little things in their lives that could have marginal improvements and over time have just exponential improvements on their lives. So with that said, with my rambling rant there, what other kind of stuff do you see that maybe not in your relationship, but maybe at work or in your personal goals, like at the gym or Frisbee? What do you do on the small parts that helps you get ahead of the world at large?
I don't remember for sure if it's in this chapter or another chapter, but we definitely talk about the difference between sort of planning and action, or action and motion. I recently just finished up a book. It's sort of I guess a marriage book. It's written by this guy named Francis Chan. It's more so just kind of a book about approaching life, but it's called You and Me Forever. And he kind of approaches like, hey, if you're a Christian and if you believe in eternity, then that should have some impacts on how you approach your marriage, approach raising your kids, and all these types of things. And something that he talked about in the book that I think, whether you're on board with the whole Christianity thing or whether you're not, something that he said that I think is really meaningful is, as he's talking about these different ideas, these sort of different concepts, he really harps on the idea of, hey, do something. Like at the end of each chapter, there's a section that says do something. And I think a lot of Christians in particular really love to go to church and hear sermons, to read the latest book by Francis Chan or whoever, but to listen to the podcast, to do all of these things and to just kind of fill up with this sort of head knowledge, and then sort of have this mindset of, okay, when I get the opportunity, I'm going to know the right thing to say. I'm going to know the right thing to do. And I'm just going to kind of wait for the opportunity. I'm going to wait until, I hear God's voice telling me to go and like adopt a child, or to go and, I don't know, do whatever it is. And Francis's thing is like, hey, you need to be doing something. Like, don't sit and wait for a divine intervention. Don't sit there and like continue to just accumulate knowledge that you're never putting into sort of an action. And so just go and do something, and trust that that's going to lead to meaningful results. And there can be course correction that will sort of happen, but what are you waiting for, right? And whether, again, it's in marriage, whether it's in your faith walk, whether it's just being in the office and trying to figure out what you want to do with your career, the idea of just take some action is incredibly valuable. And trying to go and say, all right, what is action I can be taking right now, today? That's super meaningful. And it's not that you have to get every single thing completed on your list. It's not that you have to accomplish everything, but it's like, are you making any progress? Are you doing anything? The information that you've gained, the resources that you're pulling in, that's something that has really stuck with me, that I try to apply in a lot of different ways. Is just looking at the day and saying, all right, where's a way that I can do something today?
That is beautifully said. I love the concept because I just heard this quote the other day and I have no idea where it was. I think it was in a movie, but they said that the cost of inaction is almost always more expensive than the cost of action. And a lot of people think about the risk of doing something. Oh, that could backfire this way, or people might think this thing about me. I have this image to obtain, which I'm about to slap some people for worrying about their image that they have. No, I can't watch that movie. That's a nerd movie, and I don't do those kind of things. I digress. The idea that taking actions are risky, that should always be your first choice, because not taking action is not something we normally talk about as a society, but not taking action is far, far more risky and more dangerous for you than taking any kind of action. And especially when we're talking about the small stuff. Being kind and doing something good for somebody in your life, that's not risky. Not doing it is. And you're right. Maybe you'll be embarrassed. Maybe it's somebody you just met and you showing that interest in them that goes beyond friendship. Maybe you're going to get shot down. That would hurt. And it does hurt. We've all been there. The risk of losing out on that relationship because you're scared of rejection is it's laughable in a logical sense. Like it just doesn't even make sense. And yet it happens day in and day out for tons and tons of people. Same with your relationship, being kind and having those conversations, whether they be really good. Hey, I think you're amazing and I love you, or less comfortable. Hey, that thing you said was hurtful and indicates some resentment. Maybe these are all difficult, but if you think you're going to get divorced because you tried to have a hard conversation with someone, or they're going to break up with you, like, doesn't sound like a healthy relationship if that's all it takes.
Yeah. I think with relationships, a lot of times I'll try to look and see, is the action or inaction I'm considering, is it motivated by fear? Is it motivated by love? And those are usually good sort of gut checks. And if it's completely motivated by being afraid of something, but I recognize if I did this thing, that would be a more loving action to take, that's usually a driving force for me. And when it comes to inaction, I think another thing that I try to think about is, okay, if I go into this situation and I do take action, and even if it's the worst case scenario, do I still get a benefit? Like, do I get a learning experience? Do I at least get to leave a situation not having to deal with a what if? And like, what's the worst that happens versus what's the worst that happens is if I don't take action? And there are some situations where the negative risk of taking action outweighs the risk of inaction, right? Like, we can think of those scenarios. Y'all can definitely think of those scenarios. But I would argue that a lot of times the negative for just not taking any action, it's worse. It's worse off.
Yeah. It's almost like there's exceptions to the rule, and we all can spot those exceptions, but most people say, hey, that exception is the new rule, because cliff jumping for no reason, there's some risk with that. You and I would probably still do it because it sounds fun, but admittedly, in terms of the reward versus, risk, not the best choice. But in our day-to-day lives, those kind of things, those kind of decisions that are truly, hey, maybe you shouldn't take action on this, maybe you shouldn't do the thing, it's so rare. Like it doesn't happen on a day-to-day basis. And the few ones that are almost always, they're that thought that you react emotionally to something. It's almost always a high level of emotion that you're responding to something that is when the bad idea that you shouldn't do comes apart. And you're almost more inclined to do those than the right choices we're talking about. If you want to be a jerk to somebody, that's usually emotionally based, and it's not the right decision. It's when your body says, that sounds uncomfortable. That sounds like I'm scared of doing that kind of thing. Those are usually the ones that you need to say yes to. And the things that you're like, I'm going to do this and I don't care what the consequences are, those are usually the ones you're like, hey, maybe this is an exception to the action rule. And maybe it's not going to be a part of a big sum. It's not going to be added on to this whole equation that makes me a better person. I'm just about to be mean to somebody, or I'm about to make just a bad decision, almost always because you're feeling emotional in some way or another.
Yeah, and I'd bring that back to the idea of the small parts, big sums, is that taking that perspective and doing that self-reflection, it's worth doing even in the little decisions, the little day-to-day moments, the time at work where somebody's not putting a promotion opportunity in front of you, or they're not putting a giant project in front of you, but it's hey, could you take 30 minutes to hop on the call with me and talk through this situation, when they're asking you that at 4:45 and you're like, well, I don't want to stay past 5, but if you don't have something else going on and that would really help somebody, and that's a small part, like being somebody that has built up that reputation through those repeated small actions does lead to those bigger gains. And it's worth considering, because as we've said over and over again, and truly, like, I looked up the Gestalt definition, and this is right. It's the little things that we do, the little aspects of our character, our reputation, our personality, like those pieces do all organize together to create something more than those little actions. And so, like, I'm not going to say Andrew is a great guy because one time I was running with him and I had to tie my shoe and he stopped and he waited for me. Like, I'm not going to define our entire dynamic because of that. If there are lots of little things where it's like, yeah, Andrew will do that, and Andrew will, cover for me if I forgot my card. Like, he'll grab my coffee for me. Like, he always takes the time to, if he's coming through town, to reach out and like meet up and hang out. Like, these are all small things that you're intentionally doing, that do play into this overall perception of the type of person, the type of friend that you are.
Exactly. At first, I was like, "Wow, Daniel really struggled to think of something kind I did there," but you made me warm up there at the end. So thank you.
I had to start small.
Yeah, I get it. But those are they're intentional choices, right? Maybe it's inconvenient to cover your friend's coffee bill. Any of that kind of stuff. Maybe you're going to go out of your way if you're visiting a city. And these are real life situations. Daniel was not making stuff up. These are things that have actually happened. We've done these kind of things. And there's putting other people first. Maybe that's what we should call this episode instead. Put other people first, because it's really cool. And that actually reminds me, we all know the golden rule, right? Do unto others what you would want done to yourself. I'm reading, however you want to call it, this book called The Trader's Blade. It's a series. And I'm in the second book, and they had this mind-blowing concept where they showed, oh, wow, I completely butchered that. Let me retry this again. It's not The Trader's Blade. That is actually what I'm listening to. I think I've finished like 3 or 4 books this last week between moving and driving and a couple trips. I'm blowing through books, so forgive me. We'll see if this makes it in the final episode. So I was listening to the Boba First books. That's what it was. And the 4th book just came out, Heaven's River, and I was listening to that. And I'm not going to give anything else away, but basically there's 2 different cultures going on, and they're like, hey, you know the golden rule. And the guy's like, of course I know the golden rule. Do unto others as you would want done to yourself. And they're like, no, that's the silver rule. That doesn't take into what you think about other people, like other people's opinion of how they would want to be treated. What you're doing is saying, this is how I want to be treated. Therefore, this is how somebody else would want to be treated. What you should actually do is, how would this person want to be treated? So that's what they called the golden rule. And this is a fiction book. It's in space. There's aliens. There's artificial intelligences. I think Earth has been blown up or something. This is completely fictional, but this is why I love fiction. They took a concept that we all strongly follow, and they actually expanded on it. They're like, hey, you should not just treat other people how you should want to be treated. You should actually treat people how they want to be treated. And it's such a small shift, and I've loved it, honestly. And there might be people who disagree with me because the golden rule is the golden rule, and how dare anybody change it. I mean, that's a little closed-minded in my opinion, but again, to each their own. If you want to go take your spouse to Europe, have at it. I think it's cool. And that's how you should be doing these small parts, big sums kind of things. It's not, I want somebody else to buy my coffee, but it's hey, if I am struggling, it'd be kind if somebody helps me out. And on the same concept, you have that person that's really prideful, and maybe they can't afford coffee, or they don't want to see you, or whatever it is, and it's inconvenient for them. Maybe you don't buy them that coffee. Maybe just because you want someone to do that for you doesn't mean you should do it to somebody else. Being able to put people first is kind of the heart of all of this. Do the things that have a good positive impact, even if it's the smallest thing. Take out that trash that is clogging up y'all's break room. Makes the janitor's life better, might make everybody else's life better. Just these little things that you don't have to be rewarded for are really great. You don't have to get the compliments from Daniel where you're like, oh, Daniel likes me better. Daniel thinks I'm a great guy. That's not the goal. That shouldn't be the goal of any of this. The goal should be self-improvement, which is everything in this. Leaving a good legacy behind. Hopefully people think kindly of you, but if nobody ever appreciates what you did, you should still do it, because it makes the world a better place. And that is the end of my sermon today. Excuse me for my soapbox. I will get off of it now. Comments, Daniel. I've ruined the golden rule, possibly, based on a sci-fi book.
I mean, I would argue that that's the mindset behind the golden rule is turning your focus outwards. However you want to word it, it's all about the sort of context behind it. So I'm not offended.
Dang it! One of these days.
So I'm going to do a challenge for us this episode, and the episode is focused around our small parts, big sums chapter. And admittedly, we kind of took things in a pretty relationship focused direction, which I'm okay with. I think is super important. And so for our challenge, you can apply that to relationship, absolutely, or you can apply it more so to something like skill building, which is also part of the focus in the chapter itself. But what I would love you to do this week, this month, whenever, at some point in time, honestly, do it right now if you have the chance, is write out 1 or 2 big goals that you have and start pretty big. It can be something like getting a promotion at work. It could be something like, really making some major strides forward in a relationship with a significant other, with a parent, with a sibling. It could be any sort of thing. It could be just accumulating a bunch of money. Start super big and then continue to just pare that goal down. So if you're starting out, this should probably be something that would take multiple years to achieve. Then write out what you want to accomplish within the next year, and then break it out by, monthly things you can be doing towards it. And then break it out by each day. What is something that you could do every single day that moves you further toward that goal? And then that kind of gets at, again, our idea behind the small parts, big sums is doing these little things on a regular basis really matter. And that's the only way that you actually make it to this big goal that you've got at the end. So try it out, get as granular as you can. Again, start super big and then get super small. And then just challenge yourself to do those daily things, to really follow through with it. As you get to the end of a month, as you get to the end of a year, hopefully you'll be able to look back and really see some crazy growth, some crazy progress that maybe you wouldn't have if you didn't intentionally break those things out.
That is an excellent challenge, Daniel. Thank you. I couldn't have said it better myself. Well, to everybody listening, thank you for joining us for this short episode from Dead by Tomorrow. Really appreciate you guys sticking out with us. We hope this episode helped you out. I'm going to close this out with a quote from one of my favorite, quotes. We'll just call it one of my favorite quotes in general that happens to relate to this. It has long been an axiom of mine that the little things are infinitely the most important. That quote is from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, your writer of Sherlock Holmes, which I absolutely love. Thanks again for listening, and we look forward to connecting with you soon.